Okay, here's a quick overview of doing rhythm editing in Reaper. So I've got a sound file here on the desktop. It's a little piece of a song that I want to steal a drum loop out of. So first of all, I'm going to, on my master track, make sure it's set to 2 channels. I'm also going to drag this down a little bit just so it matches the volume of the microphone. So here's what this track sounds like. It's an old David Bowie song, and what I want to do, first of all, is turn off snapping and turn off ripple editing. And now I'm free to put the cursor anywhere I want to. And the name of the game here is to find where important beats happen. So for instance, I want to find the beginning and end of the sample. So I can do that by making a selection up in the ruler here. I can just click and drag. And I can turn on loop playback down here. And let's just listen to what I selected. Okay, so I'm not quite starting where I want to be yet. I think I need to drag this a little closer to that spike in the sound. And let's track where I'm going to end. I just want 1 bar, so I'm just going to count along. 2, 3, 4, and 1. So I think and 1. I think this spike here is where that next bar starts. I'm going to drag my selection over so that it just includes what I think is 1 whole bar. Let's press play. That's pretty good. If I get close, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be pretty close, I can go to Item and choose Split Item at Selection. Notice that there's a shortcut for this too, Shift S. And now it's split that, and I can get rid of everything else. And now I can really zoom in. So at the beginning here, I want to try and start as close as I can to that. And I'm using the arrow keys here to snap the cursor to the beginning of this sound file. And I can zoom in, and if these samples here are at 0, that's going to make a nice smooth beginning with no clicks. I push the arrow key to go to the end, and I can zoom in here at the end. And notice if I hover at the edge of the sound file, I can pull the edge around. Here's the beginning of that next beat. So let's see what happens if I end just before that starts. And it looks like my samples are at 0 on that side too. I'm going to hold down Command and double click. That's a short way to select an item with a time selection. And I'm still looping, so I can push play. That sounds really good to me. So what I'm going to do now is select this whole thing. I'm going to drag it to the beginning of the session. I'm going to choose Insert, Measure from Time Selection, and then in brackets because it's going to say Detect Tempo. So it has now adjusted the tempo to fit this drum loop. If I turn on the metronome up here and press play, you'll hear the two playing along together. Great. So now if I want to be able to cut this up into smaller pieces, there's a couple things to be aware of. First of all, human beings are not completely perfect when they play. That's part of why we like the sound of acoustic music. So sometimes the beginnings of beats might not line up perfectly with what the computer has decided is perfectly 1/4 of this bar. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to make a marker. I'm going to push M, and I get a little marker here. And I'm going to try and get the next full beat. So I'm going to count again, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think beat 2 goes from here all the way up to here. I'm just going to zoom in here, try and get right at the beginning of that bass drum sound. I'm going to make another M, push M for marker. Now that I have 2 markers, here's another way to select time. I can double click in the ruler And I'll push play and see if this loops cleanly. That's great. So I'm going to go to Item, Split Items at Time Selection. So now I have one beat and another beat. Now I'm going to go to the beginning of beat 3 and see where beat 4 starts. There it is. If I go to the beginning and count, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So 4 landed right here. I'm going to zoom in. And sometimes it's a bit subjective what exactly constitutes the beginning of that sound. Is it right here, or is it right here where there's a little bit of lead up to it? And you can just try different solutions. I'm just going to push S here to make another cut, and push M to make another marker. I can double click and see how this loops. And I'm going to make a marker at the end here, double click in the ruler and see how this loops. Okay, that's pretty good. So we have 4 little pieces of sound here, and they are all roughly 1/4 of the original bar, but they're not exactly 1/4. So now I'm going to erase my markers. I can just right-click over a marker and click Remove, so I don't need these anymore. There are also shortcuts that you can program for this. And I'm going to turn snapping on. If I right-click on snapping, here's the grid. Right now it's set to be quarter notes, which is what I want. And it's set to snap the media items and selections and the cursor to the grid. So now, notice with the grid on, if I put the cursor down various places, it's going to only let me be at quarter notes. So first of all, I'm just going to drag each of these slices that I've made to the beginning of a separate quarter note. And now I'm going to use some very slight time stretching to force all of these to be exactly 1/4 of the bar. So I'm going to hold down Option, and notice how the cursor turns into a little hand. And I can actually use this to extend and compress time. So a radical example is if I make this sound twice as long, it'll sound like this. I'm not really interested in that for now. What I'm interested in is having it just snap exactly to be 1/4 note. So I'm going to hold down Option and do the same thing here. And I'm just going to basically wiggle things around here. I'm going to drag this out and then back to make sure that it snaps cleanly. So now I have 4 sections of the drum beat that are all the same length. And if I go to View here, I can bring up the project bay. There's a shortcut for that too. And notice that I've got a list of my source media, which are my sound files. I only have the 1. And then media items, it lists 4. So I've got 4 media items here. And what I'm going to do is double click on this to bring up the item properties window, and I'm just going to name these. I'm going to name them beat 1. And if I leave this window open and just highlight a new item, then I get the stats for that item. So I can just quickly go through and name these beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. And now look what I've got. I've got beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I also have a list where I can drag out new ones as well. So let's put them in reverse order. 4, 3, 2, 1. And then let's have a lot of copies of beat 1 in a row. I'm going to zoom out a bit. And if I make a time selection here, I can play this whole thing and hear what I've made. Okay, this is the start of putting together maybe something a little more detailed. I can repeat this process at finer levels. So I can open the grid settings and move this to an 8th note. I can also, if I want, make variations of things. So say I've got beat 3 here. I can hold down Option again to get the little grabbing hand and drag it out to be twice as long. And I'm going to name this variation beat 3 slow. So now I'm going to alternate between beat 3 and beat 3 slow. So let's hear what that sounds like. So sometimes when you're playing around with this kind of time stretching, you might get weird little artifacts at the end. If that happens, I'm going to turn off snapping, and there's a little bit of sound here at the end. It might even be this much. Yeah, and see, that's kind of ugly and clicky, and I am just going to get rid of that and turn snapping back on, hold down the Option key, and drag that out so that it fits. And let's see how that sounds. I'm going to make a selection here between those two and play. Okay. So you get the idea. You can also, in the beat or the item properties menu here, change the pitch. So for instance, I can move the pitch of this little bit up 5 semitones, and maybe I can move the pitch of this next one down 5 semitones. And I can actually name these different things now. So notice I clicked the I to get this window too. There's different ways to get this window, and I can do beat 1 high, and then this one here I can do beat 1 low, and those show up here in my project bay. Now I can hear I'll have a pitched up and a pitched down version of beat 1, and then I've got this slow version of beat 3. Let's hear what these all sound like. And that's the beginning of starting to work in tempo with Reaper, and by cutting up drum samples and stitching them together. You should explore that and have fun.